All right, it's Thursday, 4:20 p.m. Eastern. That means it's time for office hours, your source for free cannabis cultivation education. I am Kaisha, and I am your co-moderator today. I also can't talk. How are you doing today, Mandy?
Hey, Kaisha. Oh, we've had a long day, but it's going well. We're here for episode 55. Oh my gosh. Y'all know how we do. We're going live over on YouTube. So if you're logging on over there, make sure you send us your questions and I'll make sure I get those to the team. If you're active on social media, make sure you're also following us on all the platforms. So we're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Social Club. But I think we have a special guest with us on the show. So for those formal introductions before our Q&A, I'm going to pass it back to you, Kaisha.
Fantastic, Mandy. Thank you so much. That's why I'm so tongue-tied. We have a special guest today. But before we get to that, just remind everybody who's on with us live here, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat at any time. If your question gets picked, we'll either have you unmute yourself or I can ask for you. Seth and Jason, how's it going, guys?
Pretty good.
Good day.
Yeah. Good to see you. All right. Well, who's in the virtual building today?
Got Dylan from Grizzly Farms PDX, and really excited to have him here on the show. It's actually, I think, my first time meeting with you, Dylan. So really good to make the acquaintance, and we're stoked to hear your story.
Appreciate you. Yeah, no, I've seen you from afar, definitely with some good insight. I've worked with Seth a little bit more. I don't know what unlucky card he drew, but he got assigned to us kind of in the beginning when I picked up AROYA, and it was super, super helpful. But yeah, every time I tune into the show, I always learn a lot. So I'm super grateful to get invited on and be working with all you guys.
Right on. Well, should we just start booting it off, get the little discussion opened up, and kind of roll with it here?
Yeah, you want to just dive into some questions? And then Dylan, I'd love to hear your insights and your experience as we go. Does that sound good?
Yeah, whatever you need.
Okay. I'm going to pull the first one here from Instagram. This one came from Dave Ray. He wrote in, hey guys, seeing tip burn in week 2, low EC and substrate 2 to 3, bud drying back from 50% to 20% daily. Any advice?
It sounds like your plants are quite deficient and probably a little bit water stressed if you're drying back too far, depending on what medium you're in and whether we're talking about volumetric water content or saturation. If you're drying back from 50% saturation to 20%, we've probably got a big problem.
Yeah, and the medium, that's immediately what I'm kind of thinking too, is when I'm running those, maybe higher EC strategies, you're looking at 3.0, a lot of times I'll get that burn happening from that dry back, not necessarily from the EC you're feeding at, but just letting it get a little bit too hot on that dry back.
It sounded like that was substrate EC at 2 or 3, right?
At full wet.
Yeah, I was just thinking, typically by week 3, I'm going to see that EC substantially higher than something like 2 or 3 in the substrate itself. And so I think that's kind of one of the routes that Seth was going here is we're probably underfeeding to some degree. That plant is using up more nutrients than is available in the substrate. Make sure you're checking your pH. Like that's one of the easiest ways to know that, hey, we're running out of one of the supplemental factors, one of the ions that plant needs. And so, even at that low, maybe your pH might be balanced and they're running out of everything.
Yeah. And I was going to say, Jason, that's the first thing. What's your pH? Because a lot of times when we are in that low EC range, when the plant's taking up so much fertilizer load, your runoff might be down at like 5.1, 5.2. And at that point, not only do we have low EC in the block, but low nutrient availability overall to a plant
blocking stuff out.
Yep. And it's a plant that, first 2 weeks, it should be growing super vigorously. It should be using a lot of nutrients. That plant, I mean, typically that's one of the hardest parts about this generative steer, right? Is traditionally, even outside of cannabis, talking about having a 4 EC in the root zone seemed kind of wild for, not so much plant physiology reasons, but cost. In every other part of agriculture, we want to minimize costs. So we're breeding plants to use the minimum amount of fertilizer rather than what they can actually take. So that
genetics, I think, play huge into it too. I think you nailed it. And when I'm troubleshooting things, it's hard sometimes to go off one thing. I'm seeing tip burn. What I generally try to do is look at multiple plants in a zone. And is it the bigger plant doing it more, the smaller plant? Maybe take a couple runoff readings. And that can help kind of steer you in the right direction. If all the big plants are crushing and happy and all the smaller plants are, not, then that can help kind of indicate other things as well. a lot of people look at one plant and kind of don't get a bigger picture, which, I feel like is always helpful when I'm troubleshooting things.
Oh, absolutely. You go out in the room and you see that variation on the table and you go immediately like, okay, let's go look at all of our variables that we've got, pull any sampling we can and see. But visually, I already know these plants need to be treated differently. So now I can make the choice. Can I treat that plant differently, or do we have a zoning and consistency problem?
Yeah. And, one of the things that, Seth always reiterates is you usually can't unburn some leaves. So take pictures of what that's looking like right now. Make some of those improvement based on your evaluation in there, and then take a picture of after some changes that you see. Those cells that have already gone through some necrotic development are not going to come back to life. So just keep in mind that, take a look at the new growth. Is it undergoing the same type of outward expression that needs to be evaluated more? Did you fix the wrong thing, or have we cleared through the issue and we know how to avoid any of that in the next run?
I think that's great advice too. A lot of times when I'm helping people, medium's really important, but kind of dumbed down. I'm always like, things move slower in dirt, things move a little quicker in cocoa, things move really quick in rock wool. So when you're diagnosing problems, say it's a soil problem and you go to correct a deficiency and you're looking for that correction to happen the next day, you're probably looking too soon. And so giving it the time to actually do what it needs to do, versus rock wool, you might, adjust your pH and your EC with a nice flush. And within 2 or 3 days, you're going to be seeing the results of that correction a lot quicker than you would in another medium. So I find a lot of people are chasing their tails. We care so much about the plants, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. It's easy to go in and overcorrect and then not see exactly what that correction was, then overcorrect again the other way. And kind of find yourself chasing your tail rather than finding that correction working.
Dylan, you dove right in with that one. Let's go back in time a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your cultivation background, how you got into it. And then I would love to hear about your setup today. What are you working with up there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a great segue. I kind of started off, very, very typical ocean forest guy, big pots, Fox Farm ocean forest, feeding water, feeding teas, single-ended, air-cooled basements. Vividly remember having houses with the windows getting sucked in from the vent fans and people being like, why is your floor heated, but your house is really cold? Because there's 30 lights downstairs and my windows are getting sucked in from the negative pressure. Came from that. And thankfully, going back to we were talking a little before we came on, my dad getting on my head about screens and using those for pipes and things like that, like the sockets with the pipes. It came out after he got on my head about smoking, but I found out later on that he actually grew as well. Kind of back in the day before there was strain names, you're calling the green, the purps, the yellow, pulling halogen bulbs. And he, without going into too much detail, I'm not going to air him out, but got into some trouble for doing stuff probably a little too big and being a hippie dead guy, I got blessed to kind of get his knowledge, which was really simple and straightforward. And back in the day, you didn't really have much resource to learn how to grow. Now I think we have the opposite problem. You have so many people that are doing this, and there's so many different ways to do it. That you can get kind of overwhelmed, with the amount of data if you don't have a solid foundation. I started off in big pots and dirt, had a lot of success keeping it simple, running into mites, running into PM, figuring out how to combat those things. I've always said, good grower is someone who learns how to overcome problems, not someone who hasn't dealt with them. But transitioned that at the same time. I had a really good friend who was growing in canna and cocoa, and kind of had that kind of next level Dutch nutrient program kind of thing going on. And so we got to have rooms together that would have ocean forest with water and teas next to canna and cocoa, and kind of see the difference in how those plants eat and dry back and those genetic expressions. And I never really stopped growing. So I kind of just kept it up. There was a year pause there, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I've always had something going on, whether it's a 10 lighter at the spot or, stepped into consulting. I worked at Indoor Garden Depot for about 2 years. And I think similar, like talking with Seth, I see he has such advantage where he's talking to a ton of growers. And when you work at a garden store, similarly, it kind of, I used to always say, like, old man McGregor grows the best weed the way he does it in his backyard, and you see that working at a grow store where people get stuck in their own ways because they came from that place where they learn from one person. They know that that's how they're going to have success and how they're going to do it. And working at the grow store kind of opened up my mind to, wow, there's 20 people doing this 20 ways and they're all crushing it in their own way. And that was like the days of Supernatural, was the go-to salt thing. And, then you have the Ocean Forest guys still, or you got to mix your own TGA super soil guys. And so I saw that kind of wave. And then before I came on here at Grizzly, I was actually working as a commercial accounts manager at Bloom Garden Supply. So similar thing, helping set up some of those bigger grows, helping people troubleshoot. A lot of it was like, you don't have enough DU, things like that. But seeing a lot of different ways to do it. So that kind of led to where I'm at today, which is running this farm. And we're all on Rockwool here. We're running it's funny, they've changed the name, like Grodan's really good at this, but the baby mama blocks or the uniblocks, they're 8x4x4 open tops, and we're putting 4s. We're basically clones to, they call them a GR 6.5, but it's a 4 by 4 by 2.5. So kind of a shorty block. And we stack those on top of our uniblocks, which has been kind of a curve, and that was, I had a couple of calls with Seth getting into AROYA and adopting this program. And my crop steering before that was more Trollmaster, which gets you some data points. But when you look at it, like trying to compare, like a Dankum strategy or something like that with a sensor that's just the numbers are so different, you get an idea of it, but it's not the same. So I stepped in, and to be honest, I was very questioning AROYA and the program and the sensors. And, Seth said a bunch of stuff that I was just kind of like, wow, that's really not what I'm used to hearing, and it's funny because the more cycles we flipped, I was telling you guys earlier, we're every 17 days we do a harvest. So there's been a lot of cycles in a short amount of time. More and more things that Seth said in those original conversations has kind of like come to light. And I'm like, oh, that, what I mean? Keeping your capacity up to this point, or, all these different things kind of come to play. So it feels like a different world, when I talk about coming from the air-cooled single-ended and now where we're at with data and crop steering and Rockwool and just the level of genetics that we work with and the level that the rooms are at. So it's been a long ride, but it kind of went pretty quick, it feels like.
It's pretty wild if you're to sit down and count up how many crops you've grown in your life, right? We don't have to do it right now, but really, like, think about it. If you go back like even 10 years, you're like, wow, that has added up. And I think that's one thing that kind of gets, like Jason will sometimes say, like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of research on this or that. One cool thing about this crop is that, in most of these grows, when you've got multiple rooms going, like you said, every 17 days, pulling down and replanting, like you get to see results. Boom, 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 boom. It doesn't take years. The biggest thing that's lacking in the industry right now, or has been up until recently, is proper documentation and having access to the tools and then the confidence to be able to actually publish that stuff. We went from like, say, tomatoes over and over with quotation marks, right? To
yep.
Now we can put out some actual numbers relating to a specific plant. And
no, I mean, and you make me think about, like, it's such a typical grow store conversation, and sitting behind a counter, you always become kind of that trusted source for like, what do I do to solve this problem? Whatever it is, my plants look like this here, check it out. What is this? And it's so funny how confident people have always been in my experience with like, this was the best crop ever. And this is why it turned out that way. And there's so many variables. I mean, like AROYA tracks a huge amount of them, but there's just so many to track that it's impossible to keep track of every little detail. And it's really like, it's interesting to me that people are so confident in what's going right and what's going wrong without a lot of that data to actually point at. And AROYA has ruled, a lot of those things out. And you can look at it and be like, well, this room, we hit this point here, or this room got hot a couple times here, or we ran this room at 3 degrees higher and this room at 3 degrees lower. And this is how much that yield was, so there's a lot to look at. Whereas, it's been such a world where everyone thinks they know it all without a lot of data to actually show that has kind of been my experience. And I've always been like, man, there's 1,000 variables, even down to the dry and the cure that could be affecting that particular crop or quality. It's not just that particular nutrient line that you switch to that you've only used one time.
Oh yeah, the cures. That's a good point, dude. I've talked to quite a few, not a bunch of farms, but quite a few. And it's like, man, you guys, from what I can tell, you should be growing some fire. And they're like, man, we're just not getting the nose we want. Like, well, what's your time from cut to jar? It's like, like 18 days. Like, okay, well, we got to change that, guys. This is I know there's not as much literature out there yet, but within this industry that has existed for quite a while now, it isn't brand new. And the drying part is, I feel like, something people have figured out a long, long time ago on a basic, artisan level, and things like that, that timeline going about a month.
Yeah, I mean, you
from
smell
cut
it
to jar. People know.
So many times back in the day, you'd smell a plant on the vine before you cut it down, and you're like, oh, that's fire. That's just like one of the best things ever. And then 3 weeks later, you're sitting there like, putting it in your plastic bag. That was jars back in the day were the only way to do it when you were at that scale. I remember having just big, huge bunch of them, and being like, God, this is so much more time consuming. But really it making a huge difference. And I've seen a lot of people, mess that stuff up in the cure and in the dry by either rushing. And it's delicate because you can trap in that kind of wet, hay kind of green smell by going too quickly and not burping. Or, like in this season, it's really hard to keep things moist enough, and so we're really dry out here, even in Portland where it rains. And you'll get to a place where you're, popping totes and wow, one day it was there. And the next day you're like, what the hell happened? It's open bottle of wine kind of concept in my mind.
I have a question, Dylan, and I think you're raising some really good points around like not being attached to the old way of doing things. This is an industry that's really tied to kind of the old school. And I was just curious to know, like, what was it that was going on with you that made you realize, what, maybe I do need to go ahead and see what this AROYA thing is about?
Well, I got blessed to step into this farm where they had it installed. So it was kind of like sink or swim. We're paying a lot for this technology, and the owners here have been amazing. I feel really blessed. I've worked in quite a few different positions, in management positions in between owners and staff. And a lot of times it feels like you're getting pulled two directions, try to make the company successful, keep your employees happy, but also the owners want to do a million things that are kind of counterintuitive to that. The owners here really gave me a lot of rein, to the point where they're like, if you don't think we need AROYA, then tell us, and give us a good point to have that. And again, it was me coming from not having a lot of experience with it and being like, do we really need it? But after running it the way that I have, I really feel like it's been the key to being successful with Rockwool. I've done Rockwool before, but I did not have a lot of experience with it. And so being able to have kind of that foundation, it's really helped me, and my goal was always step on this big ship where they're already successful and make the right steps to get us better, but not steer it off the rails, and so that's a challenge. A lot of times you want to take it and do too much too soon. And thankfully I had that foundation of like, don't make a million changes at once. Let's change one thing that we know is a problem at a time. And let's, continue to get better every single cycle. But now that I've done AROYA, I think, especially with Rockwool, it's just like, we're not huge. We're, 120 lights flowering, give or take, in 4 flower rooms. But at the scale, even at that scale, I talk with people all the time. I'm like, 60 lights, AROYA is going to pay for itself. It may seem kind of expensive up front, but the data that whether it saves a row for you because it warned you in your pocket, hey, that row is getting way too dry. Well, that's money right there. Or whether you're taking it from that 2.5 to 3.5 pounds per light and not losing quality, to me, that those kind of things make AROYA extremely valuable. And I haven't seen, there's other platforms that try to do it. But what I like about AROYA is I compare it sometimes because people have asked me, what do you think about this versus, yada yada other brand? I kind of feel like it's more like Apple, and it's really like, it's silly to say, but it's really pretty and it's really approachable. And especially with the split graphs, you guys are constantly updating things without breaking the system, which happens a lot in these kind of things. I've found, you work with a POS system at a dispensary, they give you 100 updates and one helps and the other 99 set you back to where you're not compliant. So I was always nervous stepping into such a data-driven garden to be like, we're relying on this stuff and the cloud. And it's literally given me no problem since I've been here, minus like a day where Comcast was out, or something like that. And even then I'm sitting there and I lose maybe a half-hour window of data and it's not the end of the world. But it's been key to helping bring our Rockwell stuff up to the next level and really cut through a bunch of the noise in the conversations when we're making decisions with the owners. Hey, this is why we're doing this. Well, you think this is because of that. Let's actually look at this data and make an informed decision, which a lot of times that can be the biggest problem in an organization. It's not the tools, it's not the plants, it's not even the people, but how you're communicating. And I think AROYA has really helped with our communication, at least over here, to really see that data and be able to apply it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a long-winded answer to that, but
no, man, Seth and I both completely relate to that. When I started cultivating, I didn't come in with a cannabis background. I came in with an electronics and technology background. And what I had to do was start printing graphs off manually every day from our automation systems, for our HVAC systems, go in, circle things. And, it's like, hey, this doesn't look right. I don't know if it was right for the plants or not, but it doesn't look right to how this graph should be. And then that's basically how I learned about the plants was, well, this is wrong, or this is right. This is, that blip in light was when we went to go spray. All right, well, next time I know that, we can recognize that instantly. Well, if that blip's too long, or there's other indicators that it wasn't a spray, let's go investigate. Was it an electrical issue? Was someone in there screwing around with my light panel? What needs to go uphill so that we can continuously improve the processes, whether it be what people are doing, what we're doing to the plants, or how our equipment is operating.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100. And you're not sitting there scratching your head, like it could be as simple as a light alarm, and it's just like, well, we had a light on for 3 or 4 days, because our DE wasn't talking with our little Ethernet cable. Mm-hmm. And, even something like, the Troll Master can help with that kind of stuff, but really seeing, with like AROYA, what is our light intensity? What were we at? Instead of sitting there, and I still mark on a calendar. I still am a kind of write notes kind of guy. It just helps me to take that data too. But being able to look back and go, well, what did we start flower at? And with LEDs, I think it's even more important, that ramp up, that ramp down with percentages and what your PPFD is can make a huge difference. And so having that kind of data, I think is just, it's everything, and it doesn't take a huge scale for it to pay for itself. I'm not here to sell anything. It gives me a peace of mind that is priceless. When I'm sitting there and I'm like, right before I hopped on this call, I'm checking flower rooms. Oh, we got all our stuff watered. And I can scroll through 4 flower rooms and look and see that the P1s got done and the P2s are starting. And, I don't have to worry about that while I'm on a phone call with you, which I think is huge, because a lot of times I'd be like, hold on, let me go make sure that my equipment is doing what it's supposed to be doing, like you were just saying.
Yeah, I don't hear that dosatron clicking. I'll be right back, guys.
It's seized up.
Yep. Yeah, I was actually at a facility this morning with someone like, what is all that clicking? I'm like, those are good noises. That's the plants being
clicking.
watered.
Click, clack, got your back.
Yeah, exactly. But I think you touched on something great, Dylan, which is like with Rockwell, we hit this point where because you can make changes so fast, there's not a buffering capacity like we see with soil or even, slightly amended cocoa. Having the right tools is really key to bringing that consistency in. I think that's what a lot of growers I've talked to that struggle with Rockwell see is like, man, they just didn't have visibility on the fact that like, hey, that one early big dry down in day 10 that we accidentally did. Like, before I was like, man, what happened? And now it's like, nope, that killed our yield right there. That's why this run was a pound of light. And the last one was 3.8 was because we messed it up.
Well, and you did that with us. I remember having that conversation and you're able to pull up a graph remotely and look and be like, what happened here? Or like what was going on with this, which I thought was really, really helpful. And the field capacity thing was kind of new for me, coming from the pot days. You'd lift up a pot. Oh, it's heavy. Oh, it dried back, water it. With rock wool, with the plants and a trellis, it's just not the same. You're trying to like lift a pot that's completely captured in trellis netting and has a 3-pound plant attached to it. It can be really hard to feel and sticking your finger in. It's just not the same.
Yeah. Or even if you're in cocoa trying to get runoff sometimes, later in flower, once you're all in the trellis and you go try to pick up a pot and you move it 2 inches and nugs fall off, it's
100. Well, and what's crazy too is you got me thinking on it. It's like looking at data over a week can give you a lot more information than just one data point runoff. Instead of going into damage control mode, like we're talking about, okay, you have a problem. You need to do a runoff test. You need to figure out what the problem is and correct it. You're able to kind of look ahead and go, well, my EC is riding up how I'm used to it, riding up over the 7 days, right? If you see that start to go up higher than you're used to over 7 days, then that's probably a sign that you're overfeeding a little bit, especially when you get used to reading those graphs. And you can see that happening before it becomes a visible like thing in the plant. Versus sitting there and just constantly putting out fires, which you're going to do as a grower no matter what, even if you have the right software. But I think it's a game changer to be able to see that kind of stuff, as it's happening or even before it happens.
So, one of the interesting things that I hear from growers and when it's usually really passionate people that have been growing a long time, and they'll say, hey, I don't really want to be sitting on the computer analyzing this stuff rather than being in my grow rooms. Can you just share with us a little bit of experience how maybe Roy actually lets you spend more time with the plants rather than putting out fires?
Oh, 100. I mean, ironically, I've spent 4 hours today doing metric work, which is, taking 6 harvests that are 50-pound and 80-pound batches and sorting them all out by date and then tagging them to get ready for a transfer. It's what it is like people don't see how much there actually is to a garden, or a facility or how much is going on. So all the free time that you can get is good. But I came in the same way thinking, man, I'm just going to be watching data graphs and like, I'm into Pro Tools. I'm into graphs. I'm like, I'm the first guy who's like, cool, I'll spend all the time in the office on the graph. That's what it takes. But that's just not the case. Going back to what I was saying about it being like Apple, it's the visibility is there. When I work with metric, it's like you were saying, you're dealing with spreadsheets. They're not intuitive. The way that you package out of a whole package is just not, it's done to get the job done, but it's not elegant. It's not pretty. It's not easy sometimes. You click pound instead of ounce on one, and all of a sudden you're, not compliant. AROYA, especially with the split graphs, has just been amazing because I'm able to sit there and be like, click flower room 1, click flower room 2. I mean, it's that fast. And check a dry back. I can grab a dry back from the night before and be like, it's within 2-3% of what I'm trying to hit. And there's a balance there. It's never going to be perfect. No run is ever going to be perfect, but I can do my AROYA checks. And if the owners are watching, hopefully they're not worried about my time management, but I feel like I can do the AROYA checks fairly quickly, and get that data that I'm looking for, and then be back de-leafing with my guys and helping set that bar there, or cloning or transplanting or one of the other numerous things that has to go on. But I'd say it's like 20% of my time at most when it comes to the actual cultivation side is spent, digesting graphs and doing that kind of thing. And most of it's just like check my drybacks the night before, make sure my room temps are on point, look at that zoomed out week view and look and see, what that EC is doing, see if I'm getting down below, like Seth really put me on that field capacity and like, am I going below 40 at this point? Am I going below 35 at this point? And making sure that doesn't happen. So it's literally a click, a 5-minute review per room, and then clicking the open sprinkler and whatever else I'm using to control that room to where it needs to be. And it's actually, again, it's given me a peace of mind that I don't have to be worried that I'm doing the right or wrong thing all the time. And so I can do things, I'm making an informed decision. I'm not sitting there like, oh my God, is this the right move? Is this not the right move? And to me, it's actually, like you said, it's given me more time to actually work with the plants or, do things like this. It helped me level up to that point where I can take an hour and a half to do something.
And I have a two-part question for you, and then we're going to want to get to some live questions because YouTube is blowing up right now. So good to have you on. It's exciting. I was wondering, what is the size of your facility, number one? And number two, let's talk about genetics. What's going on in that garden?
So size-wise, I'm terrible about square footage. I should know because it's the bragging point, I guess, right? Is how big. But we have 4 30 light flower rooms, give or take. And those 4 flower rooms have about 350 plants in them on any given day. And then we have a really tight little veg space that's double tiered where we keep our moms, our clones, and our transplants. And that's kind of how we feed the whole facility. Genetics wise, we have some really cool partnerships. We're working with Khalifa, the dispensary, and Wiz Khalifa on some strains like that. We're also working with Cookies and Lemonade. Owners actually linking up with them right now, making some moves happen. Genetics wise, some of the stuff I'm really excited about. The white runts we just pulled down turned out phenomenal. So for me, it's like at this scale too. It's not like we're huge, but you can lose sight of the love for the plant and the product when it just becomes a job and a grind. I get excited about smoking stuff that we're putting out. And that to me is like a pride that helps me come to work at really early in the morning and stay the extra hours and come in on the weekend. And taking pride in my stuff really helps to kind of like keep the, on those days where it's hard to wake up. But really excited about the Sherb cake, and we're bringing on some new Super Boop crosses. The homie Mobile J out in Michigan. I've been working with him for shit time flies. It's almost been like 3.5 years. And actually helped get some of those cuts into, this garden before I even stepped on as the manager. I was working with the owner beforehand. And that was kind of how we built that trust for me to end up, running the facility. But yeah, I think what those guys are doing, Mitten Master and Jay and Bean Fiends, I think have some crazy stuff coming out. So we definitely have our eyes on that. And then, yeah, just a lot of Sherb cake right now, man. The Sherb cake is just killing it. It's so the nose on it, the color, as much as I want to say we're all trying to do crazy stuff and bring out the best genetic potential, like I want stuff that's going to crush it regardless, and so having a genetic that can give you some tolerance and like, oh, we didn't quite knock that one out of the park, but it's still AAA, I think is important, and genetics play into a huge part of it. Running these high PPFD, high EC strategies, if you try to run that with an old school strain, it's just not going to work for you. Some old school strains can tolerate it better than others, but I've just found it's like if you're pheno hunting, seed junkie under LEDs using these kind of strategies, it's going to be a lot easier to adopt those kind of strategies and run them and have success. Whereas if you're running a strain that was bred outdoors or under a single ended bulb, it's just not the same kind of game necessarily. But yeah, I feel like strains are just completely, it's funny, they're talked about, but not in the sense of cultivation enough. Mm-hmm. More about like what's selling in the bag, not what's growing and how, you see a lot of pictures and it's like, I compare to the pit bull game. Everyone wants to be a pit bull breeder. Everyone wants to do, and you see these dogs in person and they can't move, and so easy to make something look really good on Instagram, but like, how does it actually perform in the garden is huge.
Yeah, turn your grow lights off and get a really bright flash in your camera, right?
Oh, 100. Yeah, I mean, and you got to make your stuff look good for the gram too. It's like I feel it. Jay is a master of making that stuff look phenomenal, but you can tell he's doing the job too.
Yeah.
So
well, that's an art into itself too, right? Like just capturing that. One thing I think is rad though, now that we're entering this world of sensing and data aggregation and utilization, like. We're talking about genetics. Now, when you run these things, you at this point in time, you're kind of on the cutting edge of actually being able to say, how does this strain grow? Back in the day, you'd get like, well, it's a 10-week strain, it's a 9-week strain, it's an 8-week.
Yep.
How long is it stretched for? I don't know.
100.
Yeah.
Well, it stops.
It stops. Yeah. How did you grow it before? Oh, we had it in a 15-gallon pot and grew it in the backyard.
When it needed.
Yeah. Last time we thought this was in the backyard. Like, okay, that doesn't tell me anything, dude. Like, I got no clue. Oh, it was 12 feet tall. Like, and cool. It was in your backyard. Cool. Like, this is going not in my backyard. So, like, let's see what's different. And like, now you can actually tell people, like, hey, if you ran a strain that you like, or you're working with a breeder and saying, hey, we're trialing this, where we can help you is actually giving you real feedback. Like, hey, we can actually show that this strain really tolerates high EC in the root zone. This particular 100. one is loving it. And we can also show you even like, hey, we messed up on this run and we didn't stack it. And actually this one weirdly loved it more. Cool.
100.
But now you have the data. You're not like, was it the EC? Was it the drybacks? What was it that got it all frosty? Now you can look back, look for the regularities.
You see what genetics run really well together and what don't. I've found is like I've made the mistake of putting two strains like, oh, it's pink runts and white runts. Let's put it on the same row. They're both runts, right? And you're just like, one leans way more this way and one leans way more this way. And so you end up overfeeding one and underfeeding the other and drying back too hard on one and just struggling with that the whole time. So AROYA has really helped me with that, where I'm like, load up the strain in the zone. You know what I mean? Don't try to mix strains up unless you really know that those ones are going to work well together. But like you said, you can see that data almost instantaneously, which is really cool. I'd like to see on the genetic side, I'd just like to see more people breeding for quality smoke. We're living in this world where back in the day, that was the cool thing too, is your experiment wasn't with a lab or what sold on the market. It was, what smoked good and what you liked at the high. And I think we're in a place where, unfortunately, a lot of it is high THC and purple and frosty and yielding 3 pounds light easily. And that doesn't necessarily translate to good quality smoke. And I see it in a lot of gardens where it feels like the strain catalog is like 5 gelato crosses. You know what I mean? Or it's like five cherub cake, just gas purple frost hybrid, instead of having, where we had Blue City Diesel, Jack Herrera, Blackberry Kush, you have like 5 really unique phenos, just because of what the market's demanding. And I don't think that's a grower thing as much as a market thing.
Totally.
For what people, want to buy. But I would love to see the game moving back towards terps and, having uniqueness in those cultivars too. Probably take some time before we get there, honestly.
You're speaking the truth, Dylan. That is straight facts. And that is what we are here for, to help people grow that quality. We're going to get to these live questions. There's a lot of action on YouTube. So Mandy, take it away. And Dylan, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we just cracked open the discussion of genetics. We need to do a whole episode just on that. Thank you guys for your questions over on YouTube. Thanks for all the shout outs. We have people in Germany shouting out to us. We have Dr. J, Iron Armor. Everyone's giving us the great questions today. I want to go over a quick poll. So Dylan, he likes to listen to music when he trims. And so we thought it'd be a great question to ask, what's your favorite music to listen to when you trim? So the answers were reggae, rap, rock, and country. And reggae beat them all by 55%. So thank you guys for answering that. I'll go ahead and get to y'all's questions. So Iron Armor wrote in, what's the max PPFD to shoot for in flower under HPS? My veg is LAD. I'm hitting around 600 ppfd before I move them into flower, then bump them up to around 900 ppfd day 1 of flowering. Should I keep pushing ppfd until leaf temperatures exceed 82 degrees, or C, bleaching unhappy plants? Do you have any advice?
I think they nailed it right there. I mean, I wouldn't call I wouldn't call 82 my solid line. Sometimes with HPS, you can push those leaf temps up higher to 85, 86. But you're right on. Leaf temp's the way to go. Get a laser thermometer, play with your light height, look at your PPFD, but also get that leaf temp. See what they can take, because that is our limiting factor, right? If we get too close, like if we're pushing 1500 PPFD with an HPS, that light's probably close enough that we're physically torching the plant with radiant energy. Same reason your arms feel warm, but you don't actually get a melatonin sunburn response. You just get irritation under HPSs. There you go.
Yeah, they sound like they're on it, with all the data, especially. I have 2 HPS rooms and 2 LED rooms here, which is cool. You get to see, all I'd add is like going back to the genetics, different genetics are going to take a hell of a lot more than others. And you kind of have to find that balance between what does the very top of your canopy look like versus the middle and the lower. Because you're gonna sometimes get the tops unless you have perfect canopy management. And even then, I'm watching to see like maybe it's a little overlit in that top, half a foot. But once you get down into the mids and the lows, all of a sudden, everything's chunky and nice and turning over good too. So I always call it like a light band, and different lights are going to have a different usable light band, but just something to think about when you're trying to find that balance. Push it a little hard, one run, and then back off a little the next one, and kind of see, like Seth was saying, where that happy balance is.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there too, Dylan, on certain genetics, like side by side, bench by bench in the greenhouse, bench next to bench in the greenhouse. You brought up Blue City Diesel. We pheno hunted through some seeds like 5 years ago and got
fire.
Well, we picked out an interesting one. It grew like a baseball bat. It didn't want to branch very much, but we'd end up going pretty high density. But that stuff, it was great. It was beautiful. Great bud structure, great production. Bench next to it, we'd have this old pineapple cut that we like to run. That stuff, the prime bud was like probably about a foot deep in the canopy. Everything that was, because it would stretch a lot. It was like you're talking about those old school genetics that just can't take as much. That thing, I went up there with the thermometer. I'm like, holy shit, it's like only 84 up on these top colas, and they're blowing up. And foxtail.
Pineapple was crazy foxtail.
But then the bench over, you're like, oh, this plant just has a better growth habit. And actually, we're getting better PPFD where we're getting good nugs on this plant. So we found like where, this one genetic likes it. Okay. For the pineapple, we got to treat it way differently, apparently, and then it goes right back to you're like, okay, well, we probably shouldn't ever run those two strains in the same run, especially if we're taking cuts at the same time and putting them in the same production stream.
I don't know where I picked up on this from because it was so long ago, but it feels like modern day cultivars tend to have more consistency throughout the canopy, whereas that was not necessarily bred for as much back in the day. So back in the day, people would be like, yeah, the top canopy looks great, but it doesn't fill out down lower, and that was acceptable. I feel like strains like starting with the original Girl Scout cookies and that kind of stuff really started to push that density down lower into the plant and give you a more uniform product throughout that whole light band. Whereas, you get into the older school strains and they just never were bred to do that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're at a point too with genetics, right, where we it bounces back and forth. You got some people that demands high THC, others it's super high yield. Now we're hitting the point where disease resistance is coming in more now that we actually have people doing genetic research.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. We give it a few years and I think we'll get a kind of a nice intermingling of all those traits we want. It's just, in traditional plant breeding, a lot of times, like I worked in peas for a long time. That's about a 6-year track, even doing 3 generational advancements over the winter in the greenhouse. So it's not going to happen tomorrow. You're not going to get like your GMO that finishes in 8 weeks and always puts out 3.5 pounds tomorrow. But 5-10 years, as long as the market keeps some of those strains in play and those breeders can actually work on them for a while, we're going to have a lot of the versions that we really want as growers.
Agreed. It's an intensive project even to do it in a half-assed way. Plants are amazing because you can grab 1,000 phenos in the first ton and you can get that breeding done in 6 months. My mom especially has been into horses, and again, talking about dogs and the dog game, you may put 10 grand into some pit bulls and it's going to take 3 years before you hook them up and put a litter down. And that's only 6-7 dogs to work with. A horse, it's $100,000, to put down 1 or 2 foals, and that could take 4 or 5 years. So plants relative to that are extremely fast. But being able to do the work, and I think that's where AROYA is huge too, is being able to take 1,000 cultivars and narrow it down and collect that information and go forward with the right foot. It's a huge amount of work, and you have to have the background working with those genetics and those strains to know what you're actually looking for. You could give someone the recipe, but if they haven't tasted good food, how it's supposed to be done, then what's the reference for it? If you're trying to teach someone even something simple like making a sourdough bread, something like that, it's 3 ingredients, but it's completely different how it can come across.
That's a great example. I'm going to remember that sourdough because I've tried making my own sourdough starters a few times and there's no consistency there. Start it, then it dies.
7 years.
Yeah.
7 years. And I'm still like, I get lucky sometimes.
Yeah.
Making sourdough is more of an art at this point, though. So I get that. Awesome. Iron Armor, thank you for your question. And we're still getting a lot of questions over on YouTube. So I'm going to go over to Dr. J's question. I'm in 1 gallon cocoa bags, 3 weeks in flour, for 600 HLG. I'm sorry. My runoff ppm is at 2200 and pH is at 5.8. What ranges of ppm should the runoff be at this point? Do I need to stack EC or is this a good range?
So if you're hitting, I mean, that's a little over 4 EC we're looking at on a ppm 500 scale, of course.
Thank you for the conversion. I was like, I got to break out a scale over here.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, what meter are you using? Is yours set for ppm 500
or
or 700?
One or the American one?
So I would start there, convert it to EC, because when we're talking about ppm, that's something that I personally use to mix nutrients and dose. Like parts per million is something that is weighed or measured. EC, we're talking about electrical conductivity with decisiemens. So the idea there is we're not looking at, when we talk about ppm coming out of that runoff, we have no way. I mean, if you have a sweet lab, you could go analyze it and see what's inside that runoff. But with your pH and your EC meter, you're not, if you get ppm and pH, that's not actually, you don't know what's in there. So we're just looking at salinity levels in total. And personally, 2200, you're probably right in the mode. But at the same time, how much runoff are you getting? What's actually happening in the root zone? Because at 2200 runoff, if you are at a little lower in the root zone, but you're feeding a little higher, it's just not a good representation of what's actually going on in the root zone.
And this is why having the full picture with substrate sensors, knowing your feed EC, and then watching the dynamics of that EC can play a huge part. Runoff isn't necessarily one of the easiest things to get a full picture because you're getting one quick snapshot. Obviously once it stops running off, that root zone is going to be typically rising in EC. That unless you're already on a little bit low EC and the plants are eating more than or faster, then the salts can concentrate in that block.
Yeah, I think input numbers are really important in that equation. What are you putting in? How big is the plant? How, medium size can help, but being able to see that plant and that plant health would help be able to be steer it a little more this way or that way. It sounds like you're probably close to within range. Only thing I'd add is doing cocoa runoff tests. I'm generally looking more at my pH than my EC, because my EC has been 6.0 off the charts, you know what I mean, with plants, and with an input of, 2.8 or 3.0. And as long as your pH is within range, usually you're going to be okay. Doesn't always mean it, but I've just seen extremely high EC numbers in cocoa runoff, where plants are just still crushing it. It can hold a lot of stuff in there. So
yeah, and that's something I want to comment on real quick, just to interrupt you guys. Sorry. When we are talking about EC and runoff, do your time series tracking, even if you don't have AROYA, because if you started off low EC and you haven't been able to build, you're not going to be able to go high EC. Your plants aren't adapting to that. But if we can, if we have that time series, we can answer that question a lot more solid. Has your runoff been slowly ramping up to that? Or are we seeing like, whoa, suddenly it's 2200. Now is it time to react? Like those are the kind of things we got to look at. These values, because these are living systems.
Yeah, over a week. That's why, again, being able to look at that data in real time can be a lot more informative than just one spot test somewhere.
Yes, absolutely.
Totally agree with that.
Our friend Michael dropped a comment here. Michael, you want to unmute yourself? You want me to just read it? Yeah, let me go ahead and read it. He wrote, leach testing helps clarify the gap between feed input and runoff measurements. So a little extra clarification there. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And Dr. J came back with a little bit of clarification. 4.2 EC. And then he says, I plan on getting the sensor soon. So yeah, if you guys have any other feedback.
I think he's going to be stoked to be watching what's going on in the root zone compared to his runoff and actually be able to make decisions based on real data rather than being like,
sounds like he's ready. It sounds like he's ready for it.
Yeah, you're right there. You're already doing the math.
I'm like, people have already have a lot of info, and that's the kind of people that I think can run with it. You have a healthy plant, sure, but how do you take it to the next level? Rather than just trying to kind of put out fires all the time. So
there's
I appreciate the input too, Michael.
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to go on to our next question. John sent in this one. In veg, is it possible for a plant to be chunking through a full EC point in a day?
In veg, I'm guessing that means eating through a full EC point. And the answer is absolutely yes. A plant pulling down 500 ppm in a day is, I mean, especially if we're starting this big and we're growing to this big and we've, put on 10 times the amount of biomass, that plant's needs for nutrition are going to go up rapidly. That's why I always stress to people, like you want to try to get it up to close to a 4 EC at your wettest before moving into flower. Cause otherwise, right back to that time series thing, if you can't build it up, you're not going to be able to control that osmotic stress. And if you can't do that, you might as well stay lower EC, lower your lights a little bit, and work with the numbers you have.
I think that's a great point too. One thing I noticed when implementing strategies, where a lot of people struggle and I'm roasting my plants, or this strategy isn't working, or 3.0 isn't working. It's like over a clone, if we take a clone out of a dome and it's a healthy clone and you stick it in that 4, that initial dryback period is huge. And then every single couple days after you start P1s, which might be 4, 5, 6 days, depending on what you're transplanting into, every day that need is changing dramatically. Especially at that stage, you might have a plant, that needs P1s, day 1, and then P2s, 3 days later. And the difference between that can be a healthy and a not healthy plant. Whereas if you just have a static strategy, that can, actually kind of hurt you sometimes.
Yeah. One thing I always like to stress to people is most, agronomic science we have going up to this point, it all happened experimentally. We obtained all these values not by like going to a lab and analyzing plant tissue and saying this or that. We have a lot of research that shows how, these nutrients get into the plants and everything that makes it up. So it's like, it's not super complicated at this point. And it's not magic, and you shouldn't rule out the fact that you want to, like Jason always says, take pictures, take pictures. So you have a visual analysis. You still have to, at the end of the day, interpret what a healthy plant is. We don't have a camera to aim at your plants and tell you that they look like garbage yet. You still got to look at the image and interpret it. So,
though there are some apps out there where you can take a picture of it and it will tell you it's a pot plant.
I've seen that ad on Instagram.
I hope it can get that one right.
You're growing a strain from 1992 with 3.5 BC strategies.
Whoa, has the tech really gone that far? That's really cool. You guys are just pulling my leg. Awesome. Thank you for the question, John. We also have a couple more questions, so I'm going to try to get those through those really quick. B-Town wrote in, what do you think of under canopy light instead of lollipopping?
Oh, what do you think, Seth?
Well, you don't have chloroplasts on the bottom of your leaves. So you're probably not going to get a whole lot of benefit from doing that versus proper pruning techniques and a better light source potentially, if that's where you're at with it. Inner canopy lighting has been shown to be useful in some places. So instead of it being like down by your pots, it's actually up in your canopy. But that also brings about a whole new list of logistical challenges, right? Now we got these light bars in between our layers of trellis that we have to work around when we're working on the plants. So can it be helpful? Yes, but I think it's kind of an overcomplicated system to deal with something that has a better solution. It's kind of like if you're to ask me about CO2 in a very old school greenhouse that's not sealed up and is venting constantly. Can we put drip tape out there and get it to the plants? Maybe. Is it worth it to do it in the middle of summer when the fans are just on all day? Probably not.
And if this is kind of a question that you're asking at your facility, make sure that you're analyzing, are you doing proper crop or canopy management practices, right? Like, what is the goal here? Do we want to try and reduce our de-leafing labor? Well, maybe it's a cost option for you. But you really have to weigh what complexity gets introduced, just like Seth was saying, and what's the goal here? Are we just trying to produce more A buds down lower? What are you trying to get to?
Yeah. And as we hit, commodity prices across the board, like not everyone's dropping to $500 a pound right now, but the industry is marching more towards the value of a product being based, obviously at your branding and your marketing, but also on its input value or input cost. That's agriculture in general. So how many times are you touching the plant? I think we've talked about that on here before, like a head of lettuce, like, man, you touch it twice and you lost money. Yep. So we're heading down that route where it's, kind of like what's better, to veg your plants an appropriate amount of time and nail your plant density, or go back in and super crop? Because that super cropping for a whole room might cost you $2,000 per shot when you have a couple people. You know, if you got 5 people in a room to accomplish a task in a day, that is not cheap.
I tend to be really slow to adopt new technology. I think there's a balance there, you know, especially you guys are, you know, cutting edge with data technology. But I think until I see a lot of other people crushing it, and not just like, oh, there's some person who's a cool looking person on Instagram crushing it out with a new hype product, you know. And I'm not saying that's what the under canopy lighting is. I think it goes back to the strains and how they're bred and how they're going to fill out regardless as well. But I tend to see, like, I don't want to bring a strain into my garden unless I see 3 or 4 people really knocking it out of the park, and not just like Instagram shots, you know, like, what is that actual plant growing like? What does it look like? Do I know this person? You know, and I would kind of treat a new product like that the same, you know. I think maybe give it 2 years and we'll see if those products really continue to, you know what I mean, hold their weight. Not saying that they might not work. Some strains might love that. I don't want to put Christmas lights in my canopies. They're kind of sticky.
Yeah. And that's a good point too. Just light maintenance down the road, you know, whether or not you break them during the growth cycle, they're going to be absolutely sticky and filthy pretty quickly. And that's just another piece of equipment that you do have to clean at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, our trays look clean about, you know, most of the way through the cycle, but there's a reason we scrub trays really good at the end of a cycle too. So.
Or, you know, your walls, different things that people might be like, really? You have to scrub that? Like, touch it, please. Just go touch it.
The glorified janitor thing is true. You know what I mean? It's like, that's at the end of the day, if your facility's clean, your plants are clean, it's because you're in there cleaning, you know, every day. My crew here is amazing. They mop the floor every day on the way out, and it just smells clean. You know what I mean? And to me, it's like, even if it doesn't need to be mopped, that's part of like taking pride in what you're doing that translates to all of the aspects of the grow. And the grows that I step into that need the most help tend to have boxes and shit piled up in every room. And, you know, they're not cleanable.
Dust on the bulbs.
Michael posted here, use your light meter to find the bottom threshold for healthy bud growth. Stop cleaning up where the light starts being strong enough. Thank you for that, Michael.
There we go.
Great way
I love
to put
this
it.
discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have one more question over there on YouTube. So Diane wrote in, what's the difference between pulsing irrigation events and ones where you just go 30 minutes straight feeding?
Oh, so drip rate would be probably the first thing that I talk about when we look at that. And I think I've used my sponge analogy probably way too many times, but you know, if we're dripping too fast, we're going to have some irrigation channeling going through there. Really what we want to do is drip no faster than the capillary effect of the media can catch up to homogenize our water content and salt concentration in the substrate. So that being said, you know, if we're on the higher flow rate side of things, we definitely want to pulse those for pretty quick shots and give some delay for the capillary effect to catch up with how much water we're adding into the substrate before we hit runoff. You know, vice versa, if you've got a really low flow rate, you can stretch your irrigations out. I probably still wouldn't go to like a 30-minute. You know, usually 5 or 6 minutes is as long as I would ever go, even with a really slow dripper.
Yeah, typically 30 if you're flowing, you know, directly for that long. We're really looking at some serious channeling, you know, unless you have a extremely low flow rate, like 0.3 gallons.
0.3s, yeah, something like that.
In a bed or something, you know, a massive pot. Because you could go back to that. And a good way to visualize it, honestly, I'll use a similar thing to Jason here on the sponge analogy. Go get half your sponge wet and see how long you got to wait till the water makes it to the other end of the sponge. And that should give you an idea of like what we're kind of dealing with here. And it's all physics, you know, there's nothing, I mean, God, maybe you could put a wetting agent in there, which would be a waste of money to try to make that faster, but that's just what it is.
Out after the first couple of
yeah. And it's just the media that like, that's a physical reality we're dealing with. You know, it's kind of like asking if like, hey, are we ever going to hit 10 pounds of light? Well, not with the current genetics and technology that we have, because that's too much biomass in too small of a space. We don't have efficiency or efficient machines to really deal with that level of biomass in that small space where you hit a breakover point where now you're spending so much money to try to maintain the environment that it's not even worth it to do it anymore.
Well, and you can see it in practice too. Like if you come from a place where you're hand watering soil or hand watering cocoa, and you come in with your, you know, hand watering wand or however, you can get it to run down the sides immediately. and get runoff out of the side of a pot, especially when it's sucked in and dry. Whereas if you soak it for a couple seconds, let it absorb, give it a second. I mean, we used to do that when you do one pass in the whole garden, crawling around on your hands and knees, and then you go and do another pass. You don't just water every single one, to try to get that actual absorption going on, which plays a lot of parts. And I found even if you're not crop steering, the being able to wet up fully with a P1 gives you a lot of control in that first stage, whether you need to push more runoff at that point or not. You can stack. And then getting to that point where you have P2s gives you that control to hit your dryback targets, you know what I mean, for the next day. So that's more of like pulsing over time. But, it's definitely, you can see that in action, even if you're just hand watering.
That's great. Nailing it. We never want to have runoff until we're at field capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. Short and sweet. Love that. Thank you, Diane, for your question. And thanks to everyone over on YouTube. Oh my gosh, we got so many shout outs. I forgot, you guys. There's so many shout outs. These AROYA cats are the real deal. Zero bro knowledge. Oh, we love hearing that. Dr. J said, I've watched all the office hours. Oh, wow. Yeah, me too. Many times over. So yeah, I think that is all the questions we can get to on YouTube. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Kaisha.
Amazing. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, YouTube. Dylan, thank you so much for coming on the show. We like to ask growers before we sign off, just any words of advice. This industry has been through a lot. So just something you want to tell the folks that are out there and want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, stay down until you come up. And if you're passionate about this, then the hard parts won't be as hard. I don't think I could do this if I didn't really have a passion for the plants and a love for it. A lot of people I see get in and it's just like, they think it's going to be growing plants. It's all fun. And it's like, it's hard work, and it's one thing that stood out to me is like, fail faster, is like, you're going to learn from your losses. You're going to learn from those lessons. And so don't be set back. If you mess up somewhere, if you're uncomfortable, that's where you're growing the most. So don't shy away from those kind of things. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean burn your whole garden down by spraying it at, too high of a spray dilution, but just don't feel like when you're failing that you're actually failing. It's an opportunity to learn. So yeah, stay down until you come up and keep the passion for the plants alive. And I think there's a space for everyone if you really are down to put in the work, and work with other really good people like all of you guys. It's been a pleasure, and I've learned a lot on this platform and talking with Seth and being able to cut through that knowledge. So I appreciate you guys as well.
We appreciate you, Dylan. Thank you for just sharing your experience and your knowledge. We learn from you. So it's just really cool to have you on. You may need to come back again. I'll just say that. So thank you again for being on the show. Seth and Jason, once again, thank you for dropping the knowledge. Mandy, producer Chris, couldn't do this without y'all. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you for everybody for joining us today on AROYA Office Hours. We do this every Thursday. And the best way to get answers is from the experts is to join us live. To learn more about AROYA, clicking the link in the chat will get you a demo with one of our experts. They'll tell you all about how it can be used to improve your cultivation production operation. And then, as always, let us know if there's a topic you'd like covered on a future office hours session. Post questions anytime via the AROYA app. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Send us an email to support.aroya@metagroup.com. Send us a DM over Instagram, Social Club, LinkedIn. We are on all the socials. We record every session. We'll email everyone in attendance a link to today's discussion. It'll also be on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please do spread the word. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Dylan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Man.